We screamed into space and heard the echo. Part 5, Paranoid Android. 2532, Royal Castle, Kingdom of Iveria, UVR. Amy cleaned the blood off the dagger using the corpse's pants, straightened her translucent nightgown, before gliding to sit before the mirror. She began to brush her hair while the corpse of a half-naked man bled out on the bed. It was becoming boring. UVR wasn't real, and those she killed came back annoyed, albeit with a death penalty. It was losing its shine, especially since she had to pay off the player-killer bounty that was placed on her each time. Saintus, a low voice said off to the side in the shadows. Without looking away from her reflection in the mirror or ceasing her brushing, she answered, "What is it, Gross?" If she was slightly peeved before, now she was mildly irked. "I thought I said I was not to be disturbed." "You have done the deed, so I thought." "You are not paid to think. You are paid to do as I say." Amy felt like they were reciting lines of a play, which she found enjoyable. "What is it?" "I brought you some news of the real world you might find interesting," Gross said, still hiding his form in the shadows. Amy waited. It annoyed her how Gross took his role as a shadow assassin so seriously. Sometimes she wanted to grab his shoulders and shout at him, "It is only a game." If only she could kick him to the wayside, but he had proven himself useful. Also, she had made the mistake of telling him she resided in Endeavor Station. The knowledge of her location gave him a terrible hold over her as long as she wished to continue playing the part of the Saintus. Being the Saintus brought so much raw power and prestige, she deemed it worth it. Also, it helped pay off her bounties. She decided she would put up with Gross for now. Gross waited patiently just to annoy her, she was sure, and eventually Amy snapped, "What is your news?" Did she hear a titter from the shadow? She decided to ignore it. "You have said your hunts here in VR have been lacking, so I have found something you may enjoy in your own station," Gross said enigmatically. Amy kept quiet, waiting for him to continue. He loved not getting to the point, but he would eventually get there. Amy kept brushing her hair, feigning indifference at his news. "My sources say the EIC found something that you won't get in trouble for removing. The nest of a pest that is infesting your station. I know you are longing to unilive something that won't get you in trouble. You may even be thanked for it. Rogue goblin eggs. A whole nest full. Goblins. Little green humanoids with pointy floppy ears. They were given equal rights under solar legislation just because they were sentient and were well known for their mechanical expertise. But they also had a nasty habit of pulling pranks and laying eggs all over the place. Killing a hatched goblin would be seen as murder, but an unapproved egg batch. The EIC saw that as the extermination of vermin, especially in EIC stations, of which Endeavor was the largest. "You have done well," Gross Amy conceded. "Send me the location and you may go. Oh, and take the noble skull. We wouldn't want the idiot waking up here after his death penalty expires. Thinking about it, throw it in the deepest, darkest dungeon. It will take him a while to find his way out again." By the time she had finished speaking, Gross was already gone along with the noble's corpse. Sometimes UVR was very convenient. 2532, Amy's apartment, Endeavor Station. Something was wrong. Sue blinked. The view before her didn't make sense to her. She blinked again. She was in a bedroom, that much was clear. Unkempt bed, nightstand, table, door, curtains, and so on. The bedroom looked similar to hers in size, though the decorations were different. Sue's apartment was devoid of useless knickknacks, ornaments, and posters, while this one had more of a clutter. A plastic fat cat in the corner that waved a paw in the air. A poster of a fantastic landscape with a castle in the background and unicorns prancing in the green meadows that she further recognized as a limited edition poster for UVR. There were a few stuffed toys strewn about the bed, though they had seen better days. A faded yellow bear with many with seams coming undone, a pig with one button eye missing. One donkey appeared to have lost half its stuffing and looked especially dreary drooped over a pillow. All this didn't worry Sue. What was out of place, besides her being in the bedroom at all, was her perspective. She was on the table. but not sitting on the table. It was more like her head had been jammed through the table and her chin now rested on its surface. Also, she couldn't move. Sue couldn't budge her head at all besides blinking and pulling faces. She couldn't feel her limbs, but she could look around. In the corner of her eye, at the foot of the bed, she saw somebody. But not just somebody. Her body. Her body was wearing her work clothes and name tag, readable from the awkward angle, Sue Knightley. Most concerning was that the body was headless. "You are finally awake," a feminine voice said to her side, outside Sue's vision. The voice was the same one from the tire warehouse. It didn't take long for Sue to connect the dots. She had been kidnapped and beheaded. The voice continued, "Can you talk, toy?" as a hand and arm crossed Sue's vision. Someone grasped both sides of Sue's head and turned her to face her kidnapper. Sue's eyes darted around the room, trying to find clues as to anything. Any information may be useful. To her disappointment, there was nothing of note except a VR helmet and a few cables that lay on the bed. Her captor continued, "Aren't you a marvelous toy?" It wasn't a question. The long-haired captor bounced onto her bed. Dark hair. Dark eyes. The kind of face that some might consider beautiful, but not one that would win beauty pageants. Her captor was wearing a comfortable-looking long-sleeved flannel pajama top. She turned Sue to face her as she spoke. "Your name is Sue, right? Would you like to play a game with me, Sue?" What Sue wanted was her body back and an explanation of the entire situation. The only logical way to achieve both was to ask her kidnapper, but she had to be careful. The kidnapper was clearly a very disturbed individual. Sue decided to begin with something easy. "You know my name. It is only fair that you tell me yours as well." "Amy House," Amy said without giving it a moment's thought. "You are one of those androids, right, Sue? Do you want to play UVR with me? It is a lot of fun, but it would be even more fun if someone played with me. You could be my personal servant." Delusional and deranged. Sue processed what she had been told. She knew she wasn't a machine. An AI in a manufactured body. She bled when she was cut and she ate and slept like any other human. Now this Amy was going on about games and servants. She mustn't panic. Panicking would not help her. "But we hardly know each other," Sue said, hoping to pull more information out of Amy. "I work for EIC, for example. And I like cats. Could you tell me a bit about yourself?" Amy lazed on her back, wiggling in between the soft toys on her bed while holding Sue with both hands above her. Amy's arms must have grown tired as Sue was quickly lowered onto Amy's chest, granting Sue an unparalleled view of the inside of Amy's nostrils. "Not much to tell," Amy began. "I was abandoned by my mother who decided to go traveling instead of acknowledging the existence of her daughter." Sue could hear the bitterness in Amy's voice, but let her continue, "Raised by robots. Never knew who my father was. Found myself in devastation doing odd jobs since I was little. Currently I am between work. But for now I am busying myself with UVR. I am the saintess there, you know." "I didn't know that," Sue said, being agreeable. "Amy, I have a question if you don't mind. What makes you think I am an android?" Amy laughed at the question and sat up in bed. Sue's vision flipped to see the ceiling and then an upside-down view of her body. Sue was turned the right way round and moved closer to her body. Instead of what should have been a fountain of gore, Sue noted the neck stump was clean and inside were plastic tubes and flickering lights. Some blue and some green, but most were red, especially near where the neck ended. "There is that," Amy said as if she were talking down to a child. "There is also this." Sue's head settled on the edge of the bed, held by one hand on top of her head while another reached past her and pressed something inside her body's neck. There was a tiny hiss and the sound of motors and whirring gears as a thin seam appeared to bisect the body from neck down the center of her ribcage. The blouse popped open as the underlying ribcage swung open on unseen hinges, revealing more tubes and lights underneath. In the center of the chest cavity was a fist-sized glowing blue crystal with what appeared to be fiber optic filaments connecting to it. Even though the crystal was blue, the light it gave out felt warm. Poor Sue. Amy continued. An EIC android without even knowing it. I guess it is one way to get cheap labor, and if you ever get out of hand, you could be rebooted by a flip of a switch. While it sounded like something the EIC would do, it didn't make any sense because androids were expensive to make and maintain. Sue had not heard of an android that could mimic a human so well that even the android was not aware of it. It didn't make sense. Could you close me up? Sue asked awkwardly. It was embarrassing to show her insides to someone even if she didn't quite believe it yet. Why did you do it? Do what? Amy asked as she reached over and closed the doors on the android's chest but left the blouse undone, barely covering the android's front. You mean bring you back here? Because I wanted to. Because you are not really alive, so I could do whatever I wanted with you. Like take you apart and see what you are made of. Your chassis is very lifelike. I was curious. Usually people's thoughts are chaotic and all over the place and spiky, but yours are laid out into neat rows and well-rounded. It is interesting. Also, your core energy unit looks different to the ones I have seen before. They are usually more like an orange box. It must be quite a revelation to find out your whole life was a lie. Sue didn't know how to reply. A part of her still hoped this was an elaborate prank and her co-workers would jump out from under the bed and yell a surprise. Sue had so many questions, and her mixed feelings of this situation was not helping. Feelings? Did androids have emotions? Or were they fake emotions programmed into her? Sue doubted Amy had any of those answers, so instead she asked, "What do you mean by my thoughts being rounded and in neat rows? That doesn't make sense." Not that anything was making a whole lot of sense at the moment. Sue was lifted once again to face Amy, this time being placed on the bed next to her, with their cheeks on a pillow facing each other. Amy wore a knowing and all too smug smirk. You are right that I don't know the specifics, and I can see your point that nothing makes much sense to you at the moment, but you are so very calm about it. You think I'm a danger, but the way I see it, I rescued you from that storage dump and now you are mine. I mean, my friend. Friends help each other, don't you agree? Sue blinked. She had thought Amy was a bit crazy, believing she could read minds, but Amy had just repeated what she had been thinking a moment ago. Was it a psychological trick? If it was true, she had to police her own thoughts and not think about anything that might rile up her kidnapper. Amy laughed. You are too cute. The more people try not to think of something, the more they think about that very thing. Again, I am not a danger. I want to help you find out about yourself, and in return, you can play UVR with me. In fact, UVR has some people that might know what you want to know. You know, about how you came to be an android and not know it. Where did you see android cores before? Sue asked, distracting herself as much as trying to distract Amy. Amy was starting to make some sense, though Sue was having a difficult time believing what she had seen and heard. There was still a chance this was all a hoax of some kind. Maybe she was in UVR already. That was right when Amy began to answer Sue's question and then frowned. Amy thought for a bit before answering, I don't remember. It doesn't matter, Amy said, brushing off the question and reaching over Sue to pick up the VR headset. Sue shoved the headset onto herself and plugged the loose cable into it. What are you doing? Sue asked anxiously. Oh, you already know. Amy smirked inside the helmet and plugged the other end of the cable into Sue. With a press of a button on the headset, both Sue and Amy were enveloped by UVR. A while later, a banging sounded at the door of the apartment. A gruff voice on the other side shouted, "Open up. CSD." But Amy and Sue didn't hear. They were in another world. Part 6, Private Emotion. 2513, Starship Aspero, Rosette Nebula. Cookie dough is so delicious, Galga gleefully squeaked as she sucked on a pair of her webbed fingers that had been smothered with the cookie batter. How is it possible that it tastes better than the cookies? What did you call the brown bits? Choc chips? Galga's backswept head tentacles writhed with pleasure, changing from their usual white to vivid reds, and back again. That's right, Luvi, the crimson carapaced Crim flashed Galga a smile before continuing to beat the ever-loving lumps out of the dough. Shouldn't you be in your water suit? Won't you dry up? Crim added, giving the pale Akin a questioning glance through her multifaceted lenses. I can't taste your cooking if I am stuck in that prison. Besides, I can last a few minutes without shriveling up. Galga said that but double-checked her nude self for dry spots, her skin changing from its pale white and pink hue to a reddish-brown patterns that shimmered from the top of her tentacle-covered head down to her damp webbed feet. As you should know by now. Why don't you use the fabricator to do the baking? Frank asked Crim as he clumped into the mess hall of the Aspro, their small and dated but still functional starship. And why do my crewmates take every opportunity to get their kit off? He held one large metallic hand up to shield him from the view of the pair. Hey! I am wearing an apron. Crim retorted, her stubby antenna that poked through her short mess of red hair twitched with annoyance. Is it not human custom to cook in an apron? She turned quickly to face Frank, jiggling her bulbous insectoid gaster which protruded from her lower back like a tail. She folded her forearms in front of her apron-covered bosom. A clawed foot at the end of a more feminine shapely leg tapped on the floor. I distinctly remember you saying it was so, love. Frank, now holding up both iron hands in defense, yes, but not only an apron. He turned to the final crew member sitting quietly in the corner. Xandra. A little help here? There was no reaction from blue-skinned Xandra, who was tapping her finger against her temple beneath a bald scalp while she stared off into nothing. Don't bother, Xandra, Galga butted in as her lithe form splat over to her suit and began pulling it on. She is plotting our next jump, and I would not like to end up in the middle of a planet or star because you can't defend yourself. Human. The last word took on an electronic cadence as the suit closed over her head and relayed her words through the speaker in the front. Cyborg, Frank corrected her. The parts doc said I am 51% artificial at the last tune-up, so I am officially a cyborg now. He tapped a metal thumb proudly against his chest, making it sound like tapping the side of a tin of beans. The customs officer is here, Xandra said indifferently from the corner, causing everyone to look at her. Frank went to the airlock to let the officer in. No matter how many times I see it, I am still not used to that, he muttered. A moment later, a brown-haired human in a military uniform, jacket, pants and all, with a short bowl haircut was shown into the galley. A young one, likely fresh from the academy. This is the crew. Frank said, the one in the water suit is Galga the Akin, a sea slug person, our medical and science person. Galga pulled a face at the description but let Frank continue. Crim is the naked one in the apron, pilot and extra muscle. She's a former sisser. I think you call them and people, just don't call her that to her face. Especially Ant-Man. She will break you in half and turn your remains into a pretzel. Not speaking from personal experience. Not at all. Speaking of pretzels, I am hungry. Crim smiled and waved cheerfully at the officer, her antenna twitching at Frank, the only sign of her annoyance. Xandra is the space uniform in the corner and is our Civic navigator. Don't call her the blue-balled one. That is insensitive. Frank said, while Xandra sat unmoving with her eyes closed, ignoring Frank's playful taunts. And I am Frank, the extraordinarily advanced cyborg. I do the fixing and logistics. He bowed with such flair that Galga made a bubbly "lua" sound and gave a short and heartfelt applause. No one else joined in. The officer nodded to each in turn and snapped a half salute before stopping halfway. Ensign Jody Farlangan, definitely fresh out of the officer academy. I will be doing your inspection today. Before we begin, do you have anything you would like to declare? I do declare, cookies will be ready soon, and Frank is an idiot. Crim said with a straight face, evoking electronic bubbled laughter from Galga. How old are you, Jody? Galga might decide to collect some genetic samples from you later. It's a hobby of hers. Frank teased. It's not a hobby. Galga interjected, it's an imperative for the continuation of my species. I will be the future matriarch of my colony and will need diverse material to grow my subjects. Only the best will do. Like an ensign, Galga giggled, enjoying herself. This is very inappropriate, Jody blurted while having the good sense to blush. The EIC does not allow fraternation while on duty, nor the consumption of any consumables. Sorry? The poor officer did not sound confident at all. What happens on the Aspero stays on the Aspero, Crim joined in the fun. Also, I am a girl. I couldn't do that, Jody admitted, still blushing. I am sure this crew gets more than enough attention from the cyborg. The rambunctious crew fell silent and glanced at each other at Jody's rebuttal before bursting into laughter. Still laughing, Frank knocked on his crotch, which gave off a hollow metallic ringing, and said, even if the mind was willing, the body is sorely lacking. This sent Crim and Galga into further peals of laughter. With a near sigh, Xandra stood up from her corner seat and swept a glance over the snickering crew and the uncertain customs officer. That's enough, Xandra said flatly. You have all had your fun. No more messing with our customs officer. Jody is uncomfortable as it is with her new job. Jody didn't say anything, but her expression had her question written all over her face. Frank jumped at the opportunity. Civics are mind readers, but she is very good at not telling anyone else what is going on inside other people's heads. Something about privacy. Not all civics are as thoughtful as our sweet Xandra, though. Xandra gave Frank a blank, expressionless look, which made Frank hurriedly add, also, if you see Xandra so much as raise an eyebrow, you know the galaxy is going to end. Glaga gave another watery titter. It's funny because it's true. She sidled up to the customs officer and peered at her through the water-filled dome of her suit. Do you need a checkup? As a medical personage, I am more than qualified to do one. Also. How do you feel about an entire colony being your sibling? I promise, I practice only ethical DNA collection. You are frightening her again, Xandra said dispassionately. Galga backed away, the water in her suit sloshing with the movement. Sorry. Didn't mean to scare you. We really aren't scary. Truly. Frankie and Crimey look scary, but they are lovely. Xandy is the real scary one. Your teasing doesn't work on Xandra. Crim laughed. But we should get back to business. I wasn't teasing. Galga bubbled. I was being honest. Jody began but stopped herself as she considered her next action. We can do that if you like, but you will have to ask out loud so that the rest of the crew can make the decision together, Xandra told Jody emotionlessly. But I didn't say anything, Jody squirmed uncomfortably. Mind reader? Remember? Crim reminded the officer. I would have thought someone fresh out of the academy would have a better short-term memory. Galga giggled before the red-haired Formy continued, spit it out, love. All right. Jody took a deep breath. Besides the usual inspection, there is something else, or rather someone else I would like you to meet. The customs officer waved back through the still open airlock and a servitor robot bumbled into the room carrying a basket. Jody unfolded the blankets covering the contents of the basket held aloft by the robot to reveal a sleeping human baby with a tuft of dark hair on their head. As you know, this station is on the very edge of EIC territory. Jody said, we still have all the amenities of civilization, like artificial gravity, but not many humans live out here. The border is no place for a child, and the mother, well, she wants what is best for the little one. Jody was still red-faced, but plowed through the explanation anyway. You see, the mother doesn't believe she is ready to take care of a baby. She is still quite young, you understand? The mother. Not the baby. Of course, the baby is quite young. So what the mother was hoping was that you could take her to systems with more humans. Like the Sol system, for example. I can provide the fabricator formula for the child's food and... Jody's explanation petered off as Crim and Galga crowded around the servitor to get a better look at the tiny human. So adorable, Galga gushed. Oh, so cute lil love den? Crim made some baby talk to the child that had just woken up and was blinking at them with large brown bleary puppy-like eyes. While Galga and Krim were cooing over the tiny human, Xandra shouldered her way in between them. Xandra stared at the child, and slowly the corners of her mouth curled into a wide smile. Noticing this, Krim elbowed Galga and nodded towards Xandra. Galga squealed and Frank cleaned his cornea lenses while watching at Xandra in disbelief. "Well, that is unsettling," Frank added. "Galga, can I keep it?" Xandra asked, her tone no longer deadpan but holding a hint of awe as she tentatively and tenderly picked up the tiny human. Galga considered her not so stoic anymore crewmate that seemed smitten with the small creature. "Life will find a way," Galga muttered quietly to herself. "What was that?" Frank asked Galga. "Talking to myself," Galga replied, still amused by Xandra. "I don't see why Xandra can't raise the human." She turned to Krim and Frank. "Do either of you have any objections?" They both shook their heads and returned to watching their newest crew member being cradled in the arms of their navigator. "Children are such a pain," Frank said, "which is why I didn't want any." "Are you sure our Xandra is ready for something like this?" he asked dubiously. Galga was about to give an informed medical opinion, but Krim put a hand on both Galga and Frank's shoulders, while her third tapped her own chin thoughtfully. With a knowing half-grin, she nodded at Xandra, who was slowly cradling the baby. "It's too late. We have lost her, folks." "Fine. What should we call it?" Frank asked, relenting to the others. No name was provided. Jody interjected, looking out of place and suspecting they had forgotten all about her. "Not it. She is a female child," Xandra said quietly, continuing her swaying. "She is happy," Xandra said with certainty. The baby pulled a face. She is realizing she is hungry." Xandra turned her starry-eyed gaze to Galga. "Could you feed her?" Galga's hand subconsciously brushed over her own bosoms before she let it fall away. "I'll have Krim whip up something nutritious. Young have been known to suckle on surrogates, but I don't know what effect Akin milk may have on a human. The little one might begin to glow." "Glow?" Jody asked incredulously. "Their fluids are bioluminescent," Frank explained. "Don't think too much about it." Jody's expression said she had considered the implications and couldn't decide if she would be disgusted by the notion or found it intriguing. "Bethamethilla," Xandra said suddenly. "Her name will be Bethamethilla." "Her name is what now?" Frank asked. "I think my audio implants acted up for a moment there, Xandriculiniptha. Though I should not have been surprised." Galga jumped in quickly. "That is far too long, Xandi dear. The only upside of having such a long name is you know when you are in trouble with your matriarch." "What about Amy?" Krim suggested. Without looking up, Xandra said, "Welcome to our family, Amy."